On the morning of August 25, 2016, a tense silence filled the Ryan family home. Brett Ryan, feeling desperate and trapped by his own lies, was ready for a day that would change everything. He hid in his mother's garage, holding a crossbow, his weapon of choice. Brett had set up a clever digital trick to make it look like he was spending an ordinary day at home. As he sat there in the stillness, his mind buzzed with the gravity of what he was about to do. Brett Ryan was born in 1981 in Canada into a warm and supportive family. His parents, Susan and Bill, and his three brothers formed a tight-knit household. Christopher and Leland were the eldest siblings, born in 1974 and 1979 respectively. Brett was the third child, followed by the youngest, Alexander, who was born in 1987. Bill was a calm man deeply concerned with mental health, teaching classes at a local community center to stay fit and healthy. He also worked as a budget director for the Toronto Star newspaper. Susan, Brett's mother, was a cheerful yet firm woman, dedicated to household chores and raising her children. She had a passion for gardening and was an avid baseball fan. At 16, Brett graduated from high school and immediately enrolled at the University of Toronto with numerous plans. However, academics were not his only concern, as he was already worrying about money. He decided to work painting houses during the summer to cover his basic needs, buy clothes, and enjoy various recreational activities. People who knew Brett described him as always smiling and very polite. He was also very helpful, volunteering and refereeing minor league games at the local community center. Handsome and generous, he made friends easily. Despite his many attributes and above-average intelligence, university proved too challenging, and he eventually dropped out. Initially, this did not seem to affect him much, but reality soon caught up with him. While his friends built successful careers in fields like finance, healthcare, and education, Brett worked as a house painter. What started as a summer job became a full-time occupation. Behind his broad smile and worn-out paintbrush, desperation was growing. As one of the younger children, Brett lived with his parents and often received help from Bill, Susan, and his older brothers. His main issue was attempting to maintain a lifestyle that did not match his earning potential. At that time, Christopher was working with the Toronto Transit Commission, and Leland, considered the artist of the family, was studying photography and playing the drums and guitar. Alexander, the youngest Ryan, was intelligent and excelled in his studies, even attending a school for gifted children. While his brothers' lives seemed to be on track, Brett's life was drowning in growing debt, and he soon felt overwhelmed. By 2007, at the age of 26, his financial situation was dire, with debts exceeding $60,000. The crisis was not just financial. It spread to other areas of his life, leading to personal problems. He needed to increase his income urgently and spent hours thinking about what to do, which took a toll on him. Despite this, he projected a different image. Neighbors and friends saw Brett as a standout athlete, the life of the party, and often remarked that he was an extrovert in a family of introverts. Despite his worsening situation and periodic bouts of depression, Brett always tried to project a positive and strong image. He wanted to be admired, not pitied. However, the life Brett was living was far from what he had envisioned for himself. His erratic and criminal past began to unfold as he devised various plans. With above-average intelligence, instead of using it to earn extra income honestly, he embarked on a criminal career. The winning idea he had was to rob a bank. On October 20, 2007, Brett walked into an ICBC bank disguised as a patient, with bandages covering his face, wearing a hoodie, and with his left arm in a sling. He limped and carried an envelope supposedly containing professional documents. When it was his turn, he handed the teller a note stating it was a robbery and that he was armed, demanding $2,000 or more. The teller gave him just over $1,000, but for Brett, it was a triumph. He spent the next 8 months robbing banks using the same method. Brett embraced the theatricality of his crimes, deciding to change his bandaged disguise after the second robbery. He bought a high-quality beard and earned the nickname the Bearded Bandit in the media. He also wore a hat similar to the one worn by the protagonist of the show Gilligan's Island, paired with glasses, a checkered shirt, and a dark jacket. After planning his next heist, he struck again, obtaining between $2,000 and $3,000 in each robbery. After one of Brett's robberies, the police tracked his vehicle using an external camera and traced him back to his home. Several weeks later, when Brett Ryan approached another bank ready to make a withdrawal, the police had already been monitoring him for 15 days. He entered the bank, quickly turned around, and exited. Waiting outside were officers ready to arrest him. Brett pled guilty and spent the next 7 months in police custody awaiting trial. He was charged with 29 counts of armed robbery committed while disguised. In total, he had stolen $28,000. In January 2009, Brett found himself in a small, windowless room in the Ontario Court of Justice. Several close friends had written letters of support to the court, detailing Brett's generosity and volunteer work, hoping to influence the judge's decision favorably. Although many charges were dropped, he was convicted of committing 8 robberies. The court sentenced him to 45 months in prison, minus the 7 months he had already served. The judge also imposed a lifetime ban on possessing any firearms, even though none were ever found or proven to be in his possession. Brett made his first request for parole as soon as possible, but the parole board denied it. The board believed he needed to address his depressive episodes to qualify for parole. Brett accepted the recommendations and began attending professional sessions to tackle his mental health issues. The board also noted Brett's efforts to reconnect with his estranged family, discussing his depression with them. It was hoped that acknowledging his problem to his family would help manage his episodes. However, one treating psychiatrist warned that Brett could develop a more severe form of depression due to its hereditary nature. At the next parole hearing, his mother, father, and one of his brothers attended. This was seen favorably by the board, along with the fact that Brett's treatment involved counseling rather than medication. The documents showed he received 7 counseling sessions with a psychologist during this time. The psychologist's report indicated that Brett did not need ongoing psychological therapy or supportive counseling, but had the option to return if necessary. The Canadian Parole Board members noted that Brett had complied with all conditions and maintained a low risk of reoffending, granting him full parole on November 24, 2010. Brett returned home to his family, ready to start anew. However, freedom brought challenges Brett was unprepared for. Outside prison, he found a harsher world than he had left. Unable to escape his debt, he declared bankruptcy. His criminal past was easily discovered by potential employers who Googled his name and found his history of disguises and bank robberies. Brett tried to resume his house painting business, but most potential clients refused to hire him due to his past. Approaching 30 years old, Brett struggled to escape his reality as an ex-convict with no higher education and few prospects. His mother, Susan, was upset by neighbors' comments about their family. She and Bill sold their house and bought a small bungalow in Scarborough. The family decided to move to start a new life away from their former neighbors' remarks, eager to leave behind the years of Brett's imprisonment. The Ryans made the most of their new home. Susan transformed the front yard into an elaborate garden, filled with flowering plants, small shrubs, and a cat statue. Brett began taking steps to achieve the success he had always envisioned. He worked in low-paying retail jobs, but with some financial help from his parents, re-enrolled at the University of Toronto to pursue a degree in biophysics. He also made a concerted effort to be more open with his family. He visited a psychologist who emphasized that the lesson from his criminal past was to be honest with those closest to him. As the Ryans settled into their new community, they effectively started fresh. Each family member gradually resumed their activities. It seemed the storm had passed. Things were steadily improving each day. In September 2011, a friend set Brett Ryan up on a blind date with Kristen Baxter, a blonde and athletic physiotherapist. They met near her beachfront condominium. Kristen lived the happy life Brett desired for himself. She had a good job, a lovely home, and enjoyed hiking, traveling, and walking her dog. She was a pleasant young woman who looked like a magazine model, with a reserved smile that contrasted with her loud laughter when amused. Despite knowing Brett's criminal past, Kristen fell in love with him. By January 2013, they moved in together at her condo. Living with Kristen marked a significant change from his family's suburban bungalow. The condo was small but offered a stunning view of the lake beyond Toronto's islands. Brett could barbecue on the roof, watch planes land at the airport, and swim in the pool on the second floor, which had both covered and open areas. They frequently traveled to tropical places and enjoyed a dreamlike life together. However, fate had another twist in store for Brett. In 2014, his father Bill passed away, dealing a heavy blow. Brett's depression resurfaced along with financial problems. Brett confided in his therapist, trying to follow their advice. Following Bill's death, Brett paid more attention to his mother, helping her with administrative tasks Bill had once handled and doing odd jobs around the house for extra money. He needed the money, especially after proposing to Kristen with a diamond ring. Once again, his finances were crumbling, and as his bank account dwindled, he began spinning a web of lies. As months and years passed, Brett continued working, studying, and maintaining his family and romantic relationships as best as he could. But in reality, he was struggling with his past problems and hiding everything from everyone. In 2015, he dropped out of university again, but kept it a closely guarded secret. Kristen and her family believed he was still studying. He didn't even tell his therapist. By spring 2016, he received a job offer from a tech company in Toronto. This thrilled him, and he was convinced things would get better. He immediately told Kristen and his family, but within days, his past came back to haunt him. The company withdrew the offer after discovering his criminal record. Despite this, Brett convinced Kristen, his mother, and his brothers that he was still studying and had started the new job. As part of the deception, he dressed up and left home every day, leading everyone to believe he was managing his work and studies perfectly. He kept up appearances by smiling and doing everything possible to maintain his facade of happiness. On social media, he posted about various events, radiating joy, surrounded by friends, family, and his devoted girlfriend, Kristen. He portrayed himself as an extroverted, popular, and friendly person, but internally, he was under immense pressure, a ticking time bomb. In his desperate attempt to keep up appearances and show that everything was going well, Brett and Kristen agreed to get married on September 16, 2016. The date held special significance as it marked their first date in 2011. The wedding was to be held at a luxurious venue in Ontario, costing $100 per person. At this point, it seemed Brett had finally taken control of his life. His mother, Susan, was so proud that she often bragged about his achievements to neighbors. She spoke of his university degree, good job, beautiful downtown apartment, and upcoming wedding. Paradoxically, Brett depended more on his mother than ever. With so many financial demands on the horizon, he pressured her to take on more paying jobs at home. But even with Susan's help, Brett's situation was becoming dire. Less than a month before the wedding, after over a year of piling lie upon lie, Brett finally followed his psychologist's advice and confessed everything to his mother. Susan's world shattered as she listened to her son admit that he needed to secure a good job but required her full support as a mother until then. To Brett's surprise, instead of rescuing him, she issued an ultimatum. Susan told him he had to tell Kristen the truth and announced that she wouldn't give him any more money until he did. Cornered with no way out, Brett devised a sinister plan. Outwardly, he continued to appear as the most extroverted and friendly person in the group, but each day he felt worse. He tried to manage the fragile web of lies, knowing it was only a matter of time before everything collapsed. Brett sought the right moment to talk and relieve himself of the burden, but days passed, and he didn't take the necessary step to come clean. Meanwhile, Susan constantly reminded him of the importance of honesty, especially with Kristen. She pressured him, saying that if he didn't speak up, she would. She revealed that she had discussed the situation with his 3 brothers, and they agreed with her. Unknowingly, Susan pushed Brett to the breaking point. She thought Brett would make the right decision, but never imagined how wrong she was. While she saw a look of remorse on her son's face, Brett was contemplating the most terrible plans to cover his lies. Determined to keep Kristen in the dark, he would go to any lengths, fearing she wouldn't forgive him and would end the relationship. Brett felt he couldn't bear another failure and began plotting how to silence his family. Brett Ryan thought that if he could scare his family with threats, he might prevent them from talking. But as he perceived their determination to tell Kristen the truth, he concluded that silencing them permanently was the only solution. In his mind, he began devising a macabre plan involving a crossbow, a silent weapon. Acquiring one was relatively easy and wouldn't pose any significant problem, as it didn't require a permit. The court restriction against him wouldn't be an obstacle either. He just needed to be over 18 years old. In Canada, crossbows are commonly used for hunting activities, so Brett bought a second-hand one, leaving no transaction record. During one of his visits to his mother's house, he hid the crossbow among some debris in the garage, where a kitchen renovation was underway. On the morning of August 25, 2016, Brett was determined to end his anguish. He set up an elaborate mechanism to create the perfect digital alibi. He gathered his laptop, 2 4-pound weights, a wooden spoon, a digital timer, and an oscillating fan. He propped his laptop against the wall with the weights, taped the spoon to the fan, and positioned it so that the tip aligned with the enter key on the keyboard. He connected the fan to the timer, programming it to turn on in the morning. Each time the fan moved, the spoon would press the enter key, making it appear as if Brett was watching YouTube videos. He prepared a similar setup with his tablet, phone, styluses, 2 oscillating fans, and 2 timers. He taped a stylus to each fan and secured the tablet and phone to wooden boards with screws. When the fans turned on, the styluses would send pre-written messages, making it seem like Brett was home all day, watching videos and sending emails. The next step was to leave his house without being caught on any security cameras. He exited the condo by taking the stairs to a back alley, avoiding the cameras, and headed to the public transit terminal. He took a train, got off at Eglinton Station, and walked to his mother's house. He arrived at 10 a.m. wearing 2 pairs of jeans, one over the other. He carried a bag with extra clothes, a wig, a fisherman's hat, and several crossbow bolts. Susan was surprised to see him. She wanted to rest as she was battling a cold but engaged in conversation with her son despite her fatigue. Brett tried to persuade his mother to keep quiet, but she was determined to talk to Kristen. In minutes, they were arguing heatedly. Brett rushed to the garage with Susan following, insisting he tell the truth. She called Christopher, Brett's older brother, and warned Brett that he was on his way. That was the final straw. Brett attacked his mother, shooting her in the cheek and ear with a crossbow bolt. He then strangled her with a yellow nylon cord. Susan was 66 years old. After killing his mother, Brett hid her body under some debris, covering it with a tarp. He then loaded the crossbow and waited for his brother Christopher. When Christopher arrived, Brett silently approached from behind and shot him in the neck, killing him instantly. He dragged his brother's body to the garage, placed it on top of their mother's, and covered them with the tarp. Christopher was 42 years old. Shortly after, his younger brother Alexander, 29, arrived. Brett struck him in the neck with a bolt, leaving him severely injured. Leland, 37, was napping in his room but rushed downstairs upon hearing a scream. Adrenaline and rage fueled Brett as he was determined to see his plan through. Leland thought Alexander had had an accident and didn't understand why Brett told him not to call for help. In seconds, a brutal fight ensued between the brothers. Brett, intent on killing Leland, and Leland fighting for his life. Meanwhile, Alexander managed to drag himself to the front door. The intense fight took them through various parts of what was once a warm family home. They fought in the living room, dining room, and 2 bedrooms until Leland finally escaped, screaming for help, and ran to the neighbor's house. As soon as they opened the door, Leland stumbled in, asking him to call emergency services and ensure the police arrived quickly before passing out. Meanwhile, Brett took a bottle of water from the fridge, not bothering to close the door. He sent an email to Kristen, saying he had ruined everything and everyone, apologizing for not controlling his mental and antisocial issues. He then walked like a sleepwalker and calmly sat at the entrance of the house, covered in blood from head to toe, realizing he had destroyed his world. Within minutes, police and homicide investigators arrived. Brett was sitting near Alexander, who was still breathing. Brett told the officers he should have taken Alexander to the hospital and added that there were 2 more bodies in the garage. He confessed to the murders, stating he used a crossbow. At that moment, the scene was swarming with police. Shortly after Brett's arrest, Toronto police entered Kristen's apartment and discovered the devices he had set up for his alibi. Initially unsure of what to make of them, they evacuated the building and called in the specialized threat response team. The specialists disconnected the fans and removed the pencils before the timers activated. They determined it was a ruse to make it appear that someone, in this case Brett, was using the devices from that location. The police stated that preliminary investigations revealed 3 deceased individuals, 1 female and 2 males, and an injured man who had been taken to the hospital. He also confirmed that they had the perpetrator in custody. The crossbow allegedly used in the attacks was recovered at the scene. He added that they would continue investigating to determine the motive and gather all evidence left at the crime scene to get a clear and objective view of what transpired. The community was shaken, saddened by the events, but also terrified. Most neighbors had lived in the area for 10, 20, or more years. In the days following the incident, everyone began locking their doors, and they came and went with caution and fear. While the neighbors grappled with a newfound sense of insecurity, Brett had to give statements to the police. He admitted to killing his mother and 2 of his brothers, but claimed his initial intent was only to scare them. He said that when he went to the garage for the crossbow, it was to intimidate his mother, but he lost control. When brought before the court, he waived his right to a preliminary hearing and pleaded guilty. He hired a renowned criminal defense attorney known for representing high-profile clients, particularly in criminal cases. Brett faced charges of 3 counts of first-degree murder with various aggravating factors. However, he argued that the charge for his mother's death should be second-degree murder, as he didn't intend to kill her. Regarding his brother Christopher, Brett admitted to first-degree murder since he waited in hiding and ambushed him with the crossbow. For his brother Alexander, who arrived unexpectedly, he accepted a second-degree murder charge. In the case of Leland, he admitted to attempted murder and acknowledged inflicting multiple injuries. The trial was relatively brief. In the next hearing, Brett appeared before the jury and, through sobs, expressed deep regret for his actions, apologizing to his friends, Kristen, and especially his surviving brother, Leland. He vowed to use the time and opportunities presented to him, repeatedly saying how sorry he was. Brett insisted he hadn't intended to use the alibi devices, claiming he decided to talk to his mother instead. However, the expert report contradicted him, stating that the devices would have functioned to make it appear someone was at home watching YouTube and sending emails if they hadn't been disabled. The judge acknowledged Brett's immediate guilty plea and noted his apparent remorse and willingness to be accountable for his actions. The judge also remarked that Brett was, in a way, a victim trapped in a web of lies. Ultimately, Brett was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences for each murder, plus an additional 10 years for the assault on Leland. He would be eligible for parole in 2041 at the age of 60. Leland Ryan chose not to speak to the media, but shared his anguish in court. He described the horror of fighting for his life against his own brother and then seeing his mother and brothers dead. He admitted struggling to sleep and living in constant sorrow and distress. Brett had believed in the fantasies he created in his mind, but when everything fell apart, instead of facing reality, he lost himself in a labyrinth of lies with the worst possible outcome. At 35 years old, Brett had been weeks away from marrying the woman of his dreams, living in a beachfront condo. Perhaps, if he had told the truth, Kristen might have understood. But now, that possibility is lost forever, as Brett destroyed every bridge with his terrible actions. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. In the early hours of July 16, 2010, in the usually quiet town of Pico Truncado, a shocking event occurred. The body of Johanna Casas, a 20-year-old model and former beauty queen of the town, was found in a deserted area. She had been killed by 2 gunshot wounds. The prime suspects in the murder were Marcos Diaz, her partner until the day of the murder, and Victor Cingolani, her ex-boyfriend. But the story would soon take an even darker turn. Johanna Casas was born in Pico Truncado, a small town in the northern part of Santa Cruz province in Argentina. The town got its name from a nearby hill with a flat top. From there, you can see the oil wells, which are the main industry in the area. Though her exact birth date isn't officially recorded, family social media posts and news reports suggest she was born on July 19, 1990. Johanna wasn't the only baby to arrive that day. 15 minutes after she was born, her twin sister Edith was born. They are the oldest daughters of Marcelina del Carmen Orellana and Valentin Casas, who also had another child. Valentin, a police officer, eventually split from Marcelina, but he stayed very involved in his kids' lives. The twins looked incredibly alike. They had the same face, build, and even sounded similar. They even shared part of their names, as their parents named the younger twin Edith Johanna. They were so similar that their mom would sometimes mix them up, even changing the same baby's diaper twice. The sisters shared a special twin bond. Edith once said that they could feel when something was happening to the other. For instance, when Edith was 11, she had an accident while with her mom in another city nearby. She was in a coma for a few days, and when she woke up, she kept asking for Johanna. Valentin told her that Johanna, who was with him back in their hometown, felt like Edith was calling her. As they grew up, the twins became beautiful young women with very different personalities. Edith was quieter and more reserved, while Johanna was outgoing and liked fashion and makeup. This interest in fashion led Johanna to start a modeling career. She even participated in fashion shows and traveled to bigger cities like Bahia Blanca, where she was once crowned the beauty queen of Pico Truncado. In mid-2006, when Johanna was just 15, she met a local young man named Victor Singolani, who was 21 at the time. They met one afternoon at the town bingo hall, where Johanna was with her dad and brother. Victor was at another table with his mom and a friend. Later, he mentioned noticing Johanna looking his way quite a bit. Victor had a reputation around town for being quite the charmer and a ladies' man. He worked long hours at the oil company and spent his free time out with friends, often choosing local brothels over bars. He boasted about being with over 40 women who came to him effortlessly. That day at the bingo, after they exchanged looks, Victor felt sure he could start something with her. He said that Johanna made the first move by coming over and giving him a note with her name and phone number on it. He texted her right away and they started talking. They went out a few times and soon made their relationship official. Marcelina, despite the age difference between Johanna and Victor, was okay with their relationship. She preferred this to her daughter randomly hanging out with others. They were together for about a year and a half. Over time, Johanna's parents noticed Victor's aggressive behavior toward her. There was an incident where Victor, trying to hit Johanna, accidentally broke a window and injured his hand instead. Things got even more complicated when Victor and Johanna broke up, and he started seeing Edith. Victor said his feelings for her grew over time, and he was never romantically involved with both sisters simultaneously. While he was with Johanna, Edith was dating another guy, and sometimes the four of them went out together. There were also times when Victor asked Johanna out, and Edith joined because she was home alone. Victor was drawn to Edith's quieter, more reserved nature. She was just as lovely as her sister, but simpler. Even after his relationship with Johanna ended, he kept in touch with Edith. Eventually, they admitted their feelings for each other, but Edith wanted to talk to Johanna about it first. Johanna told her sister they were adults and knew what they were doing, so she didn't oppose their relationship. However, the twins' close bond changed. When Edith started dating Victor, the friends they shared began to drift apart and each sister formed her own group. Victor and Edith eventually broke up, and Victor moved on to another local woman. Both sisters continued to have complicated relationships after Victor. When Victor ended another relationship 2 years later, he reached out to Johanna again. She was with someone else at the time, but quickly ended that relationship to get back with Victor. This reunion was brief, ending after 2 months because Johanna wanted children, which Victor did not. Afterward, Johanna started seeing a man named Marcos Diaz, who was disliked by her parents. The Diaz family was surrounded by rumors, including a serious allegation that one of Marcos's brothers had killed his own child. Marcos had a violent reputation and was possessive and controlling. He was overly jealous, constantly messaging Johanna and not allowing her to go out alone. Despite these red flags, they moved in together after just 6 months of dating. During this period, Victor rekindled his relationship with Edith, admitting he had never gotten over their breakup. This back and forth between the sisters would culminate in a series of dramatic, tragic, and scandalous events. On July 15, 2010, 4 days before their 19th birthday, Johanna went out partying with Marcos until about 3 in the morning. She was last seen alive as they left the party venue together. Early the next morning, a local dog walker discovered Johanna's lifeless body in an open field about 3 miles from the town center. The area, known as the forest belt of Pico Truncado, soon became the focus of intense police activity as news spread that one of the Casas twins had died. The autopsy later revealed that Johanna had been shot at close range in the heart and between the second and third ribs. Within hours of the discovery, police arrested Victor and Marcos as the main suspects in the crime, given their relationships with the victim. Investigators suspected that the murder was a planned act by both men, theorizing that Johanna wanted to end her relationship with Marcos, and the men decided that if she would not be with them, then she would not be with anyone. Marcos was released a week later due to a lack of evidence, despite having been the last person seen with Johanna the night before. Shortly after, authorities found DNA on a cigarette butt at the scene where Johanna was killed. Unfortunately, by that time, Marcos had fled, and it would be over 6 months before he was captured and subsequently placed in pre-trial detention. Meanwhile, Victor remained in custody, charged with the murder of his ex-girlfriend. However, he consistently maintained his innocence. According to his statements on the morning of July 16th, he had been at the casino and then at a friend's house until 6 a.m. Surprisingly, his arrest and subsequent charges did not completely sever his relationship with Edith. Victor later recounted that on his first night in prison, he asked for a phone to call Edith and tell her he had nothing to do with her sister's death. He also wanted to express his longing to see her again. However, Edith hung up as soon as she recognized his voice, then changed her number, and he was unable to contact her again. Victor, trying to see Edith again, asked to be taken to the hospital, claiming he had a headache. On the way, he saw Edith walking hand in hand with another man, suggesting their intense relationship had ended. Edith later shared that she was going through a tough time. She was mourning her twin, the closest person to her, and dealing with her own inner turmoil. She felt ignored and over-medicated. 2 years after Johanna's death, in mid-2012, Victor stood trial for her murder, facing charges that painted him as abusive and controlling. The prosecution's case was built on 3 main pieces of evidence. The first was the paraffin test, done on Victor's hands right after his arrest, which detected gunpowder. The second was evidence from tracking dogs that placed him at the crime scene. Lastly, Victor's alibi failed as he couldn't confirm his whereabouts during the crime. Victor's lawyer pushed back, asking the higher court to throw out the evidence due to severe investigative errors, including a supposed audio recording of the judge of the case acknowledging mistakes by the inexperienced local police. Despite these challenges, the trial began on June 18, 2012. The prosecutor sought a 20-year sentence due to the alleged use of a firearm, while another suggested 15 years, and Victor's defense argued for his complete acquittal. Victor decided not to testify. The courtroom heard from various witnesses. Johanna's father accused Victor of past violent behaviors and threats towards his daughter, recounting a time he overheard Victor on a speakerphone call threatening Johanna. A woman who lived near the crime scene mentioned her son was the only one home that night and noted the delayed police response. The person who found Johanna testified that he saw no blood at the scene. Another witness spoke about Victor's complicated relationships with the twins, suggesting he saw Edith as a substitute for Johanna. Edith herself took the stand, having attended every day of the trial wearing a t-shirt demanding justice for her sister. She testified that Victor was physically abusive towards both her and Johanna and claimed that he had coerced them into intimate relations. Finally, she stated that she believed Victor had played a role in Johanna's death, calling him a psychopath. The hearings concluded, and on June 27, 2012, Victor was sentenced to 13 years in prison for simple homicide. However, the controversy surrounding the case was far from over. Despite his conviction for Johanna's murder and the serious allegations against him, Edith later shocked everyone by announcing that she was back in a relationship with Victor. It remained unclear how this reconciled relationship came about, but at some point, Edith became convinced of Victor's innocence and believed that the real perpetrator of the crime against her twin sister was Marcos, who was in pre-trial detention awaiting his trial. When asked about her sworn testimony, Edith claimed she had been pressured by her parents to make those accusations. Regarding the evidence presented by the prosecution, Edith sided with the defense. Just as Victor's lawyer had argued during the trial, there was never any conclusive evidence placing Victor at the crime scene. He also highlighted issues with the paraffin test, noting that it was conducted without expert witnesses present, and the officer in charge didn't wear gloves and used his teeth to cut the tape. Furthermore, Victor was found to have the highest concentration of gunpowder on his right hand. He explained this by saying he had been in his brother-in-law's truck, who often went hunting and sometimes left bullets on the seats. Regarding the tracking dogs, the defense stated that 2 of them had yielded negative results, with only 1 dog indicating a positive result, and there were no witnesses to corroborate this. They also argued that a person's scent could linger at a scene for up to a month. Victor claimed the entire trial was rigged, suggesting that in Santa Cruz, anyone could be convicted just to satisfy the victim's family's demands. While in prison, Victor took up carpentry, stating that Johanna's death had transformed him, leading him to abandon his partying and drinking habits. Meanwhile, Edith had moved in with Claudia, Victor's sister, possibly due to estrangement from her own family when she decided to reconcile with the man convicted of her twins' murder. Together, they sold chairs, stools, tables, magazine racks, portraits, and paintings that Victor made in prison. With the proceeds, he bought a pair of rings. During a prison visit, Victor proposed to Edith, and she accepted. As expected, Edith's engagement to the man imprisoned for killing her sister was devastating news for the twins' parents, who could not comprehend what was happening. For them, Victor had murdered one daughter and was destroying the other. At that point, Marcelina declared that it was as if Edith had also died. Since moving in with her sister-in-law, Edith had barely seen her family. She believed they had brainwashed her daughter and that Claudia never left her alone for a second. When the engagement was announced, Edith's family filed a legal injunction to try to prevent the marriage, claiming that the 23-year-old was mentally unstable and fearing for her safety. The wedding was originally scheduled for December 5, 2012, when Victor had only served about 6 months of his sentence. However, the injunction delayed the ceremony. Despite this, Edith showed no signs of psychological or mental dysfunction that would prevent her from getting married. On February 14, 2013, Victor and Edith tied the knot amid widespread disapproval. Their story, a woman marrying the man accused of murdering her twin sister, grabbed headlines worldwide. An Argentine journalist known for his bold reporting style won the exclusive coverage with a bid of $1,500. Journalists from countries like Germany and the USA flocked to their small town, and big media outlets like the BBC and Daily Mail covered the story. Edith even got offers from Playboy magazine and was invited to join Argentina's top TV show, Dancing for a Dream, but she turned them all down. On their wedding day, just before noon, the couple headed to the civil registry office in Pico Truncado, heavily guarded due to the controversy. Chaos broke out when Victor, still incarcerated, arrived in a prison transport. The crowd became unruly, throwing punches, stones, eggs, and tomatoes, and shouting insults. The vehicle and the registry's doors were damaged, making the wedding front-page news. Despite the chaos, Edith and Victor declared their love and plans to start a family. Yet, the legal battle over Johanna Casas's murder was far from over. On June 4, 2013, the trial began for Marcos Diaz, who had been held at the Pico Truncado police station. Charged initially as an accessory, Marcos was described in court documents as violent and controlling, known for harassing his girlfriends and often involved in armed fights. His unexplained trip the day after Johanna's murder was seen as an escape attempt, and he stopped texting Johanna right after her supposed time of death, suggesting he knew she was gone. This contrasted sharply with his frequent texts to her the day before. DNA from a cigarette butt and a music CD linked to Marcos found near Johanna's body were key pieces of evidence against him. During the trial, Edith, supporting Victor, tearfully accused Marcos of killing her sister. Valentin, the twins' father, also testified, recalling the last time he saw Johanna with Marcos and describing Marcos as a dangerous man involved in cult-like activities, often seen causing trouble at the cemetery. Marcelina, for her part, described the accused as obsessive over her daughter. He never let her be alone, not even to attend family parties. However, the proceedings took an unexpected turn when prosecutor expanded the accusations. He posited that Marcos was the actual perpetrator of Johanna's murder and the only one present at the scene when her life was taken. As a result, on July 2, 2013, the court sentenced Marcos Diaz to 12 years in prison for the homicide of Johanna. At this point, 2 individuals were convicted for the same crime, each found guilty by different courts. Following the verdict, Marcos expressed dissatisfaction with the sentence, reasserted his innocence, and claimed he was convicted because there was no one else to investigate. On the other hand, Edith expressed relief and happiness that justice had finally been served. Meanwhile, the twins' mother chose not to speak to the media, while their father expressed his disagreement with the ruling. Victor's lawyer announced plans to seek his immediate release, asserting that they had always maintained his innocence. If the evidence indeed confirmed that Marcos was the only one at the crime scene, his client would be released immediately. Ultimately, on December 5, 2013, the Higher Court of Justice announced the release of Victor due to insufficient evidence to convict him. After his release, Victor sought compensation from the state, requesting $75,000 for his wrongful imprisonment. However, he received no payment. Over time, Marcelina began to reassess her view of the events and ultimately accepted that Victor had not been involved in Johanna's murder. Although the marriage between Edith and Victor lasted several years, by 2021 it was known that they had separated. She was living with a new partner and was expecting her first child, while he had rebuilt his life with another woman. After more than 2 decades of tangled romantic relationships, a brutal crime, and a couple of equally controversial trials, the case of Johanna Casas seemed to have finally reached a conclusion. Nevertheless, to this day, there are still those who debate the facts and continue to question whether Victor was truly innocent of the events of July 16, 2010, or if he managed to escape unpunished from one of Argentina's most sensational crimes. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Christopher Wilder lived a life full of excitement and luxury. As a race car driver, he had a flashy lifestyle that included fancy cars and high-end cameras. He easily attracted many young women who were unaware of his dark side. In February 1984, Wilder began a horrifying journey across the country. Over 7 weeks, he harmed and took the lives of at least 8 young women who were hopeful models. This tragic series of events led to him being known as the Beauty Queen Killer. Christopher Wilder was born on March 13, 1945, in Sydney, Australia. He was the oldest of 4 sons to an American father, Coley Chapman Wilder, a naval officer, and an Australian mother, June Wilder. His life began with a dramatic twist. During his birth, he turned in such a way that his neck got tangled in the umbilical cord. He was stuck and began to suffocate, with his heartbeat becoming barely noticeable. Any attempt to pull him out only made the situation worse. At that time, cesarean sections weren't commonly performed. Seeing their efforts failing, the doctors decided to call the hospital priest to administer the last rites. Miraculously, as they prayed for him, his vital signs completely stabilized. This early brush with death left his parents deeply traumatized, leading them to be extremely overprotective. Despite their vigilant care, it wasn't long before another frightening incident occurred. One summer afternoon, while the family was enjoying their pool, 2-year-old Christopher dove into the water right under his Uncle John's watchful eye. He was underwater just long enough to lose consciousness. Fortunately, his father, skilled in emergency response, quickly applied resuscitation techniques. After a few tense minutes, Christopher was revived. The incident led to many health problems for Christopher during his early years, including seizures. This also affected him psychologically, making him feel fragile compared to other kids. From a young age, Christopher's father instilled military discipline in him, with his mother's full blessing. To Christopher, his dad was everything, and his greatest wish was to grow up to be strong like him, leaving behind the frail and sickly image that marked his childhood. Christopher's teenage years were stable. He enjoyed a privileged life, was educated in top schools, and had a family that was always ready to do everything for him. However, this wasn't enough to satisfy him. Puberty increased his desire to be a powerful person. He longed to influence and dominate others, so his behavior became rebellious. In the evenings, he would sneak out of his house with the intention of lurking around. When he spotted girls walking by themselves, he would quietly follow them to their homes and then watch them through the windows as they changed clothes. Satisfying her sexual appetite was her only desire. The proximity of his home to the sea made the beach his favorite place to spend his afternoons. Like any Australian boy, surfing became one of his favorite pastimes, and it made him gain muscle. No longer an insecure boy, the transformation allowed him to become confident and attractive to young girls, but not because he wanted to date them. His intentions were darker. In the summer of 1963, a few months before his 17th birthday, he and his friends were enjoying another afternoon of surfing and beers when they decided to walk the beach in search of girls. They spotted a 13-year-old girl sunbathing. They offered her a few drinks, and Christopher began making advances towards her. She felt uneasy and tried to leave, but he grabbed her arm, led her behind a dune, and abused her while his friends watched without intervening. He left her there and walked away as if nothing had happened. The girl reported the incident, and Christopher, a known figure in the area, was soon arrested. He pleaded guilty, but his parents interceded on his behalf, claiming that he was a bright young man with a promising future that would be ruined in prison. The court took these arguments into consideration and granted him probation with a series of precautionary measures. One of the steps taken was for him to undergo psychiatric treatment involving electroconvulsive therapy. This involved administering short bursts of electric shocks to the brain, with intensities varying from 75 to 470 volts. The purpose was to treat what was described as a damaged mind. In truth, his condition didn't improve. Instead, his disturbing fantasies only grew. Around the same time, Christopher became fixated on a book called The Collector by John Fowles. The story follows a solitary entomologist who collects butterflies and becomes obsessed with a beautiful art student. This chilling narrative appeared to inspire him deeply. The therapist who treated him during this time knew he was fascinated by this book, which he had nearly memorized. For him, it represented the ultimate fantasy of having complete power over another person. On a warm day in January 1965, two 15-year-old girls, Mary Ann Schmidt and Christine Sherrick, went with their younger siblings to Wanda Beach, an ideal spot for surfing. That afternoon, the wind was too strong for a peaceful stroll, so the group decided to take shelter in the dunes. Mary Ann told her younger siblings that she and Christine would go fetch their backpacks from the rocky area at the south end of the beach, and then they'd return to head home together. Hours passed and the girls never showed up. The next morning, their lifeless bodies were discovered in the sand. Christine had been stabbed 14 times, and Mary Ann's throat was deeply slashed. Their undergarments were completely torn, a clear indication of an attempted rape. The brutality of the crime shocked Sydney and became front-page news in both local and international media. Over 7,000 people were investigated, and Christopher was a key suspect since his physical description and psychological profile matched that of the perpetrator. Despite these coincidences, there was no evidence to charge him, and his DNA did not match the sample the police had from the assailant. By early 1967, it seemed like the turmoil in Christopher's life was behind him. While out for a walk in Sydney's Palm Beach, he met Christine Paluk. They connected instantly and quickly became friends. Their bond deepened, blossoming into a romantic relationship. He loved taking her to the best surfing spots and driving around the city together. To fully win her heart, he often asked Christine to also invite her younger sister, who was 15. After a month of dating, Christine began to feel uneasy, especially because he often looked at her younger sister in a peculiar way. Alarm bells rang when what seemed like a latent violent streak became glaringly apparent during a dinner at his parents' house. That day, without any apparent reason, Christopher suddenly became enraged and punched out a dining room window. Despite this disturbing event, their love overcame the turmoil, and the couple got married after a year. From day one, Christopher gave free rein to all his sexual fantasies, and if his wife refused, he would beat her until she agreed. More than sexual intercourse, those intimate encounters were rape. The hell was short. Just a week after the marriage, the wife found underwear and pornographic photos of young girls in her husband's car. She decided to end the relationship and, accompanied by her mother, went to the police and accused him of sexual abuse and physical violence. She also told them of her suspicion that he might be the killer of the teenage girls in Wanda Beach. Once the report was made, the police began their investigation. Christopher knew he was under scrutiny and could be arrested at any moment, but as usual, luck was on his side. There was no solid case against him. However, the warning prompted him to distance himself from the situation, and with his father's help, he emigrated to the United States. By early 1969, he had settled in Boynton Beach, Florida. He adapted easily and found his calling as an electrical contractor and construction engineer. The real estate boom at the time quickly made him a lot of money, and he became even wealthier when he ventured into the real estate business. With his newfound wealth, Christopher bought a luxurious bachelor pad. He had two public passions: photography and competing in amateur car races. He bought several high-end cameras and set up a photo studio in his condominium. This hobby soon became a ploy to seduce beautiful young women. Using his charisma and approachable appearance, he posed as a talent scout for famous magazines, thereby attracting vulnerable victims to fulfill his sexual perversions. Christopher spent considerable time roaming the beaches of South Florida, looking for women until one day he was arrested in Pompano Beach for demanding that two girls pose nude for him. The police detained him, but not for long. He only had to pay a hefty fine to be released. 3 years later, while at a shopping mall, he posed as a photographer and convinced a schoolgirl to allow him to take pictures of her for a prominent magazine of the time. Upon arriving at his van, he drugged her and forced her to have sex with him inside the vehicle. The girl fled and filed a complaint with the police. He was arrested again but managed to negotiate the charges, claiming that his mind shut down on weekends. As a result, he was granted probation with a therapy regimen. Despite his ongoing criminal record, Christopher had managed to evade any formal charges until the mid-1980s, when he persuaded a teenager to get into his car for a photo shoot in a rural location. There, he committed a horrific sexual assault. Arrested and taken to court, he quickly pleaded guilty, but manipulated the jury into believing he would seek immediate psychiatric care, resulting in a verdict in his favor. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation with the condition of attending therapy sessions during that period. At this time, Christopher was seeking a genuine and deep relationship. It was then that he met Elizabeth Kenyon, a 19-year-old who had recently been an Orange Bowl princess and a finalist in Miss Florida. Their relationship was brief. He quickly proposed marriage, but she declined, citing the age difference as too significant, though they remained on good terms. It had been more than 10 years since he last saw his parents, and using this as a reason, he persuaded the court to allow him to travel to Australia. Once permission was granted, he returned to Sydney in 1982. It didn't take long for him to resume his previous modus operandi. He took with him his cameras and a bunch of cards with a false name to pose as a model photographer. One afternoon, he was able to trick 2 girls under the usual pretext, and drove them to an isolated area of the beach where he forced them to undress and pose suggestive poses. Seeing the fear in the teenage girls, he put them in his car and drove them to his hotel. While there, he threatened to beat them. He tied them up, abused them for hours, and then released them. But he was arrested and charged with kidnapping and sexual assault. The case went to an initial detention hearing in a local magistrate's court. The accused didn't seem worried about the charges and claimed that it had all been a misunderstanding. His parents paid a substantial amount of $400,000 for his bail, and he was allowed to return to Florida to handle business matters. Christopher promised to return for the hearing scheduled for April 1984. This situation put him at a crossroads. He was unable to control his impulses, was about to be tried in Australia, and was already known in the United States. He couldn't risk being charged again. The only solution he could think of was a dark one: ensure his victims could not live to tell their stories. Back in Florida, he resumed his passion for cars, and on February 26, 1984, he participated in the Miami Grand Prix with his Porsche. There, he approached Rosario Gonzalez, who was working as a product promoter. Rosario shared her aspirations to be a model and her recent participation in Miss Florida. He persuaded her to have a quick meeting in a nearby cafe to arrange a photo shoot for her portfolio. She agreed, and at noon, they were seen leaving the location in his car. Rosario lived with her parents, who knew she was supposed to return home between 5 and 6 p.m. When she was going to be late, she always notified them. For this reason, and because she did not make any contact, her parents quickly filed a missing person report. Witnesses confirmed that the young woman had left the racetrack between noon and 1 p.m. with a Caucasian man around 30 years old. Rosario's car was found parked near a shopping plaza, but there were no traces of her. The Miami Herald published a profile of the suspect. By then, Elizabeth, his former girlfriend, had become a teacher for children with special needs. On March 5, 1984, in the late afternoon after finishing her workday, she headed to the gym as was her routine. After leaving the building, she exchanged a few words with the security guard and then walked away in her Chrysler. She made a brief stop at her usual gas station and, by chance, ran into Christopher. He wasted no time in asking if she wanted to model for him in a session, and she happily agreed, so they continued their journey together. That night, Elizabeth hadn't returned to her apartment, but her roommate wasn't worried, assuming she was visiting her parents in Pompano Beach, Florida, about 50 miles away. The next day, when Elizabeth didn't show up for work, her family, knowing it was out of character for her to leave without notice, decided to report her missing. Frustrated with the slow pace of the police investigation, her parents hired a private investigator. With his expertise, he quickly linked Elizabeth's case to that of the young woman who disappeared during the Miami Grand Prix. He also recognized similarities between the ex-boyfriend and the suspect described in the press. The detective visited Christopher's residence, but when questioned, Christopher claimed he hadn't spoken to Elizabeth for over a month and had no idea where she could be. As soon as the detective left, Christopher destroyed all his pornographic material. He then packed his belongings, including his cameras, withdrew $50,000 from his bank accounts, started his car, and headed north towards Georgia, resigned to the fact that his capture was imminent. After driving for 2 hours to northern Florida, he stopped at the first shopping center he found on the evening of March 19th. With camera in hand and his fake business cards, he approached a 21-year-old woman named Teresa Ann Ferguson, who was shopping. He offered her a modeling job, and his words swayed her. He led her to his car and opened the trunk to show her the equipment to convince her of the job's legitimacy. However, When she was momentarily distracted, he grabbed her by the hair and forced her into the trunk. He drove to a marshy area in northern Florida. Ensuring they were alone, he opened the trunk, dragged Teresa out, and strangled her. Without hesitation, he placed her body on the marsh's edge to conceal the heinous crime. In his frantic journey, Christopher made his way to Tallahassee, the capital of Florida, about 4 hours away. His first stop was Governor's Square Mall. In his usual manner, he approached college student Linda Grover, complimented her beauty, and filled her head with fantasies of being on the cover of Vogue if she agreed to work with him. Initially, she refused, but eventually his persistence led her to agree to see the cameras in his car. When he opened the trunk, he pulled out a blanket, restrained her with it, and forced her into the car. He fled the scene, crossing into Bainbridge, Georgia. There, he dragged Linda to a cheap motel where he raped her and subjected her to various tortures. After 2 hours of this nightmare, while he slept, Linda managed to sneak to the bathroom and started screaming. He grabbed all her belongings and escaped. Linda was rescued and identified her attacker from photographs shown by the police. Meanwhile, Christopher fled the state. He drove all night, covering a 9-hour journey to Beaumont, Texas, where he took a break in the parking lot of Lamar University. There, he noticed a nursing student named Terry Walden. Despite deploying his usual charm, she flatly rejected him. On March 23rd, he returned to the mall and was again met with rejections, leaving him deeply frustrated and considering leaving empty-handed. However, he then saw Terry again. Thinking she might have changed her mind, he approached and insisted once more, but her response was the same as before. Enraged by her rejection, he followed her unnoticed to the parking lot. As she opened the door of her car, he suddenly appeared and pushed her inside. Driven by his anger, he took her to a secluded spot where he stabbed her 43 times in the chest, then dumped her body in a nearby canal. He fled in her car. During the search for the nursing student, Texas authorities found Christopher's car abandoned in the mall parking lot. There, they discovered hair samples belonging to Teresa, confirming his responsibility for her death on Merritt Island. By March 25th, Christopher was in Oklahoma, hunting for another victim at the local Penn Square Mall. There, he met a 21-year-old woman who dreamed of becoming a model. His tactic worked better than ever. It was not difficult to convince her to come to his car under the pretense of conducting a photo session for $100. He drove 180 miles north to Newton, Kansas, checked into room 30 of a motel, and abused her until dawn. After breakfast, with absolute coldness, he drove his victim 90 miles northeast of Newton near Junction City, Kansas, where he stabbed her to death and dumped her body near Milford Reservoir. By March 29th, Christopher was in Colorado, continuing his spree. This time, he was at Grand Junction. He started looking for a specific type, a girl with a cowgirl look. He found his target in 19-year-old Cheryl Lynn Bonaventura. Well-dressed and polite, he introduced himself as a modeling agent, and she was thrilled with the proposal, as it was her dream. Naively, she voluntarily got into his car, agreeing to the plan to leave the city. Along the way, they stopped at a restaurant in Silverton where, in front of the staff, they pretended to be a married couple heading to Las Vegas. They arrived the next morning at the Four Corners Monument, where the states of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet. They took a photo at the iconic spot and continued their journey to Page, Arizona, near the Utah border. There, Christopher booked a room under the same pretense of being a married couple. On March 31st, Cheryl's family reported her missing to the police, though they hoped it was just a misunderstanding or an act of rebellion due to her age. Unfortunately, that morning, Cheryl and Christopher's journey took them to the Kanab River in Utah. a remote area with deserts, mountains, and cliffs. As they silently admired the scenery, Christopher unexpectedly stabbed his victim and then shot her, leaving her lifeless. He abandoned her body in a desert area. Christopher's journey continued to Las Vegas, Nevada. His plan was to attend a modeling event, which for him was a paradise filled with naive girls eager to succeed in the tough world of flashes and glamour. Camera in hand, he arrived and sat in the front row to scout his potential victims. At the end of the day, after talking with several teenagers, he focused his attention on 17-year-old Michelle Lynn Korfman. She had driven over 25 miles from her home in Boulder City, Nevada. Nervous about participating in her first casting, she had asked her family and friends to let her go alone. They talked, and Christopher filled her with compliments. Subsequently, Michelle changed her clothes and left the mall in his company. It was April 1st. As soon as Las Vegas authorities alerted the FBI about the disappearance of the young woman at the modeling event, the agents reacted swiftly, requesting all photographs taken during the evening. A photographer promptly handed over 5 rolls of film. After developing them, they could see Michelle walking the runway, with Christopher intently focusing on her. Meanwhile, like the others before her, Michelle suffered violence and torture at his hands. Her body was left at a rest stop in Southern California. On April 4th, Christopher reached the opposite coast of the United States, in Torrance, California. There, he went to a shopping mall, where he saw a girl filling out a job application. She was Tina Marie Risico, 16 years old. He offered her the usual plan and the same $100, much more than she would earn as a store employee. The young girl was hesitant but excused herself, saying she needed to get home. Her rejection did not sit well with him. He pointed a gun at her and demanded she get into his car without making any noise. Frightened, she complied, and then sat in silence for 2 hours while he drove to San Diego. Once in the city, Christopher rented a room and unleashed his usual barrage of abuses against the girl. During a break, he turned on the TV and was shocked to see a special bulletin announcing him as a new addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, specifically linking him to the disappearance and murder of several young women. He was dubbed the Beauty Queen Killer. In a turn of events, he chose not to kill Tina, but instead coerced her into becoming his accomplice to lure more victims. In exchange for her cooperation, he promised to release her in the next city. Terrified, she agreed. He started driving back east and arrived in Merrillville, Indiana on April 10th. There, Tina kept her word. At the South Lake Mall, she convinced 16-year-old Dawnette Sue Wilt to join them, assuring the young girl that another woman's presence meant safety. In the parking lot, Christopher pulled out a gun and forced Dawnette into the car. Once at a nearby hotel, Tina witnessed him attacking Dawnette for 2 consecutive days. Christopher kept the TV on and saw another FBI bulletin, this time Tina's mother pleading for her daughter's life. Panicked, he ordered the girls to grab their belongings and get into the car immediately. He then drove non-stop to the border of New York. Considering it too risky to travel with both, he left his car in a wooded area of Penyon. While Tina stayed in the car under threat of death if she left, he took Dawnette into the small forest. Suddenly, he began to strangle her. She fought back fiercely, but he pulled out a knife and stabbed her twice in the chest. Thinking her dead, he walked away. Fortunately, Dawnette was still alive. With great effort, she managed to drag herself to the side of the road. A truck driver took her to the hospital in Penyon, where they managed to save her life. Hours later, she was able to report what had happened to the county sheriff. She detailed her attacker and the young woman accompanying him. She described the vehicle they were traveling in and their intended escape destination, Canada. This triggered a police operation to capture the fugitive. Christopher drove to Victor, New York, just 50 minutes from where he had abandoned Dawnette. He parked at the Eastview Mall, exited the car violently with a gun in hand, and kidnapped Beth Elaine Dodge, a 33-year-old woman who was passing time while waiting for her daughter to come out of daycare. He forced her into his vehicle and commanded Tina to drive Beth's car. After a short drive to the outskirts of the city, he stopped next to an abandoned gravel quarry. He pointed the gun at Beth, led her to a densely wooded area, and shot her in the back. Then he made Tina transfer all belongings from the other car to the stolen one. In his way, Christopher reassured Tina that he would not harm her and chose to drive to Logan Airport in Boston. There, he bought her a ticket back to California and set her free. While in Boston, he headed north to Beverly, Massachusetts, attempting to kidnap 19-year-old Carol, who he assaulted suddenly on the street. However, he was unsuccessful as she managed to escape screaming for help. Descriptions of both the vehicle and the suspect were circulated among patrol officers, making it only a matter of hours before the serial killer would be caught. On the afternoon of April 13th, needing directions to Canada, he stopped at a gas station in Colebrook, New Hampshire. However, 2 state troopers recognized him and approached. At that moment, Christopher reached for the gun in the car, threatened the officers, and a struggle ensued with one of them. Suddenly, the revolver went off twice. One bullet seriously injured the officer, while the other struck the killer directly in the heart. Christopher died instantly. Throughout his spree across the United States, he kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered 8 young women, but it is believed there were more victims. Christopher Wilder was cremated in Florida, leaving behind a personal fortune of over $7 million. In June 1986, a court-appointed arbitrator ruled that this money should be divided among the families of his victims. There were numerous missed opportunities to stop Christopher's spree of violence, which escalated into serial killings. However, his parents helped him evade punishment. Jurors were swayed by his false promises of seeking psychiatric help, and the victims were left at the mercy of his twisted mind and horrific fantasies. And that concludes today's Unreal True Crime. Remember to subscribe and hit like to let me know you appreciate my work. Until next time.
She sat straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming, and I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. It's about that long, and she rolled against it and cut right here, best I could tell. And I'm no medic. It cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Well, right here. He described where he stabbed.
These were just some of the chilling confessions made by the truck driver who had been targeting women while crisscrossing America. Adam was born on August 6, 1964, in Jonesville, a small town in North Carolina, USA. He dropped out of high school early. Adam was a tall, burly man with a thick, rough beard. He was married to Miriam Benj for 5 years. Their relationship was rocky because, according to Miriam, Adam thought women were beneath him and that he could do whatever he wanted with them. He was abusive to Miriam and even to his own mother, whom he insulted and hit. In 1993, the couple divorced. That year, Adam became a truck driver and began traveling along the East Coast. He drove trucks and worked part-time at a chicken processing plant near his home in Jonesville. Years later, he settled down with another woman. They lived in a trailer home with 3 daughters. Adam had never been in serious trouble, but those who knew him described him as dismissive of women and often antisocial, controlling and always ready to pick a fight. A former co-worker traveled with Adam in his truck for about a month in the late 90s, covering much of the country. His co-worker eventually refused to work with him any longer because of Adam's constant negativity, argumentative nature, and disrespectful attitude towards women. In his truck, Adam carried a DVD of a horror movie called Hunting Humans. The film, about a serial killer who stalked and then knifed his victims, had a huge impact on him. So much so that when he set out on his trucking trips to the northeastern United States in the summer of 2007, the first things he packed were the DVD, 2 large hunting knives, a torch, and a leather mask with holes for the eyes and mouth. In July 2007, Adam left North Carolina and headed east on Interstate 78, with stops planned in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Early on July 13, 2007, Darlene Ewald, a 42-year-old mother of 2, was on the phone in the backyard of her home in the middle-class suburb of West Hanover Township, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. While she spoke, her husband Todd, a carpenter and youth soccer coach, and their children, Nick and Nicole, ages 24 and 21, were asleep inside. It was around 2 a.m., and Darlene was chatting with a family friend about a surprise trip they were planning. That friend had planned a Caribbean cruise but ended up offering their tickets to Todd and Darlene after having to discipline their sons. Darlene was thrilled about the upcoming October adventure. Unbeknownst to her, someone was watching her on the warm night. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure emerged wielding a long knife. It was Adam. The killer slit the woman's throat and violently stabbed her in the left side of her chest until she died within minutes. All she could scream was, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" On the other end of the phone, her friend heard the sudden change in her voice. Although Darlene no longer responded, the call was still active. He shouted her name, hoping she would answer. Panicked, he rushed upstairs to wake his wife and told her something terrible had happened to Darlene and that he needed to go to her house immediately. Meanwhile, after the murder, Adam calmly returned to his truck, parked at a nearby stop, and drove away, leaving behind the crime scene. Chad and Patty, Darlene's friends, sped to her house. Arriving there, the place was eerily quiet and they headed to the backyard. The kitchen lights shone through the sliding glass doors, and they could see Darlene's lifeless body slumped in a chair, her eyes still open and a gaping wound in her throat. Shocked, they immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, Todd was still asleep in his room. An officer yelled at him to show his hands. Todd, groggy and barely understanding what was happening, was blinded by flashlights and confronted with guns pointed at him. Nick experienced a similar rude awakening. Both men were handcuffed and taken to the kitchen. Todd kept asking what was happening and where his wife was, but the police did not answer. Then he noticed Darlene's purse on the table next to her car keys and cell phone, which made him worry. The detective eventually removed Todd's handcuffs and took him to another room, while another officer spoke with Nick in the kitchen. Todd then received the devastating news. Darlene was dead. He was heartbroken, feeling a pain like never before, as if someone had ripped his heart out. The whole Ewald family was in shock. Meanwhile, Adam continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Later that morning, he picked up a load from a company as scheduled to continue with his work. Hours later, the detectives interrogated Todd at the station. He struggled to explain how he hadn't heard anything. However, the detectives were not satisfied with his testimony and considered him the prime suspect in his wife's death. The next day, they brought him back to the station for further questioning. They asked about sensitive points in their marriage and accused him of killing her over financial troubles based on their reviewed finances. Todd insisted he had a good job and savings and had no reason to murder his wife. The police then suggested that she wanted to separate from him, which led to her death. Todd maintained his innocence and even took a lie detector test, which the police said he failed. Confused and desperate, he then sought a lawyer. The family was left completely devastated by the crime. Since the incident, Nicole, the 21-year-old daughter, refused to go out alone at night. Her brother Nick relived the tragic memory of their mother's death, often lying awake at night. Todd said the murder destroyed his life and wished he could have been there to save her. Darlene was the first, but sadly not the last victim of the so-called highway killer. On the night of July 17, 2007, in Conewago Township, rural York County, Pennsylvania, a woman named Patricia Brooks was sleeping on her couch when Adam burst into her home. The house was close to Interstate 76 and about 25 miles south of where he committed his first murder. Adam stabbed Patricia in the neck and shoulder with a huge knife. She woke up to indescribable pain, immediately covering the wound with her hands and screaming. Adam then fled through the back door he had entered minutes before, allowing Patricia to survive the attack, although she could not make out any features of the man dressed in black who had attacked her. Monica loved her new home, located in Bloomsbury, New Jersey. Everyone there was friendly, and she felt that nothing bad could happen. She felt so secure that she never locked her doors. Monica had great friends with whom she spent hours talking online. She also had other big passions: photography, motorcycles, and rock and roll. Without any ties, she lived life to the fullest, attending concerts and traveling, embracing each day as if it were her last. On the night of July 28, 2007, Monica was sleeping in her bed when, around midnight, Adam parked his truck at a nearby stop. Dressed in black and carrying a knife, he hid in the shadows, silently moving through the picturesque streets in the dead of night, searching for unlocked doors. Finding Monica's front door open, he quietly stepped inside. He moved through the house noiselessly until he reached the bedroom on the first floor. Startled awake, Monica turned on the light, and that's when he attacked her with the knife. He fatally stabbed her in the throat. She bled out and died quickly, but not before struggling against her assailant. Adam stabbed her multiple times in the neck and chest. Monica died alone at the hands of that monster, without time to call for help or escape. She was cornered with nowhere to go. The crime shocked the peaceful community. Initially, detectives focused on people Monica might have been romantically involved with, as it seemed like a crime of passion. However, they found no solid leads. The police had no suspects until they noticed something significant. Monica lived near the truck stop and the interstate. They decided to contact the FBI, which had begun to systematize investigations of similar crimes occurring along interstate highways across the country. The federal agency suspected there might be one or several serial killers, possibly a trucker who used the highways to randomly select his victims, stalk them, kill them, and then escape. Less than 24 hours after Monica's murder, a new chapter of horror unfolded in Chelmsford, a town in Massachusetts. Adam continued his route northward, parking his truck at a rest area. Around 11 p.m. on July 29, 2007, in an apartment complex, a woman spotted a man hiding in the bushes and called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the man had vanished, but a few hours later, security agents received a frantic call through the 911 emergency service. A man was trying to enter the home of a woman located in a mobile home park. She reported that her daughter thought she saw someone staring at their house, so she went outside to check. There, she encountered an individual dressed all in black, wearing a mask, looking like a ninja. The man turned around, followed her, and banged on the door. She was terrified. The police arrived within minutes, but once again, the suspect had vanished. 90 minutes later, around 4:30 a.m., Adam showed up at the home of Kevin and Jeannie McDonough, located about 2 miles from the trailer park and just off the highway. Kevin, a 49-year-old utility line contractor, and his wife, a 47-year-old administrative clerk, lived in a 4-bedroom house in Chelmsford, a town named one of the best places to live in the United States in 2007. Their 2 children, Shay, 15, and Ryan, 19, also lived in the house. Adam tried the back door and found it unlocked. Shay had left it unlocked around midnight because she thought her brother was still out, not knowing that Ryan had stayed at a friend's house that night. So, Adam entered the house without any trouble. The family's dog, a black Labrador mix named Bosco, was outside and never barked, later leading to suspicions that he might have been drugged by the intruder. That warm night, everyone in the town was asleep. Shay had moved to the guest room because it had air conditioning and was right next to her parents' room, making it cooler to sleep. Suddenly, she felt a huge hand covering her mouth and nose. It was Adam, wearing a mask with openings for the eyes and mouth. In his other hand, he held a huge hunting knife. She couldn't breathe and couldn't see well in the dark room. At first, she thought it was her brother who had come home late, but then she heard a stranger's voice threatening to kill her and making some noise. Adam pulled down the sheets that covered her, and that's when she panicked. She, a swimmer with strong legs, began kicking vigorously against the wall adjoining her parents' room. What happened next, in moments of desperation in the quiet Massachusetts neighborhood, was both a complete nightmare and an incredible story of heroism. She's frantic kicks and a muffled groan woke her parents, who thought she was having a nightmare. But when they entered the room, they saw the huge intruder, initially just a large black silhouette to them. Adam, who was 5.9 feet tall and weighed 245 pounds, was confronted by Kevin, who weighed 160 kilograms and was 5.6 feet tall. Kevin lunged at the intruder, grabbing his wrists, throwing him to the ground and pinning him down. He shouted, demanding to know who he was, while Jeannie tried to wrestle the knife away. Suddenly, Adam burst with adrenaline and stood up with Kevin on his back. Kevin held on and wrapped his arm around Adam's neck. Then, both men crashed against a wall. With his back against the wall, Kevin squeezed the criminal's trachea as hard as he could. Meanwhile, Jeannie managed to take the knife away but severely cut both her hands in the process. By then, Shay had run out and was calling 911 on her cell phone. She told the operator that a tall, burly man had entered her room and threatened her life, and that her parents had caught him. Jeannie and Kevin fought hard to defend themselves, struggling for their lives while waiting for the police. Sometimes, people freeze in situations like these, but the McDonoughs undoubtedly summoned incredible strength and managed to subdue Adam, who was much larger than them, even wresting the knife from him. The officers arrived at the house in 4 minutes and saw Adam subdued by the family. Kevin had applied a powerful headlock that immobilized him. One of the officers warned the intruder not to move or he'd shoot him in the head, while Kevin calmly brushed himself off and asked the police to remove that scum from his home. As the police patted him down, they found evidence that alarmed them. A couple of knives, larger military-style household knives, and a belt from which sheaths for the blades hung. They also discovered a flashlight used for strangling, a ninja star, a hood, and a terrifying leather mask with cut-out eyes and mouth. Meanwhile, in Adam's truck, they found what appeared to be trophies or souvenirs from previous victims and several DVDs, including one from the movie Hunting Humans. After the incident, life slowly returned to normal for the family. Shay started seeing a therapist to help manage the terror she sometimes felt, but she still had problems sleeping alone. In fact, their dog Bosco began to sleep by her side every night. Whenever she saw a shadow, Shay would still get up, but she was grateful to be alive and often remembered how her parents fought for her. They didn't consider themselves superheroes, just parents who acted instinctively to protect their daughter. The FBI was handling a database of about 80,000 unresolved violent crimes across the United States. They had started gathering information on serial killings and assaults near major highways. By 2007, they had recorded more than 500 murders with similar characteristics over the past 30 years, but they were concerned there might be more hidden cases. Approximately 200 suspects had been identified, most of them truckers. With their investigations, the FBI had helped state police with baffling crimes that remained unsolved, and also connected cases that were sometimes half a country apart. Often, suspects use distance as a smokescreen to cover their tracks. When they dispose of a body and move 2 or 3 states away, they know it will be difficult to be identified. The first thing the FBI does when it receives a case is to look for specific characteristics they can investigate. For example, if someone is strangled, the search focuses on all strangling cases. After receiving calls from the police in Massachusetts and New Jersey about unresolved stabbing cases, an FBI analyst determined they were very similar and not far from major highways. This prompted them to put officers from both states in contact. Soon they began linking Adam to his other crimes. Investigators learned that the criminal had been in Bloomsbury the night Monica Massaro died, at a truck stop less than a mile from her house. A receipt found in his truck led them to that lead. In August 2007, a New Jersey police investigator decided to go to Massachusetts to question Adam about Monica's murder. For over an hour, the detective conversed amiably with Adam, just trying to gain his trust. Then, he directly asked if Adam had attacked anyone in New Jersey. Adam then asked if there was the death penalty in that state. The detective replied that no one had been executed there for years. Adam smirked and said, "That's why I haven't done anything there. What I've done is what I've done, and I haven't done anything wrong." Then Adam confessed to killing Monica and described the crime in detail.
She sit straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming, and I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. It's about that long, and she rolled against it and cut right here, best I could tell, and I'm no medic. Cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Showing no remorse and exhibiting great cruelty. Initially, Adam claimed he was just a struggling trucker trying to make ends meet for his family of 5. He said he had been sidelined by a back injury, which affected his finances and required him to take medication for various ailments, including hallucinations and diabetes. He claimed his original plan was only to steal some money. He tried to justify his actions by saying he had lost everything, including his family. At the same time, he insisted that he respected the law and treated people the way he liked to be treated. He claimed that when he entered Monica's house and found her asleep, he covered her mouth, but she resisted, and in the struggle, she accidentally rolled onto the knife and bled to death. He then claimed he tried to cover up the crime by stabbing her multiple times to make it look like a sexual crime. The detectives found his version of accidental death hard to believe. Adam insisted that he didn't intend to kill her and that he used his knives as intimidation tactics in case he was discovered. He also denied deriving any sexual pleasure from the murders. Almost a month after his arrest in Massachusetts, Adam was charged with Monica's murder. In most of the cases, DNA has become one of the most accurate tools for individual identification, used by thousands of labs. It's employed first for the identification of biological traces of interest in criminal investigations of various crimes, second in the identification of human remains and missing persons, and third for biological research on paternity and other kinship relations. In Adam's case, DNA was also essential in linking him to his crimes. Weeks after the interrogation where he confessed to killing Monica, investigators received the analysis of the knives recovered in Massachusetts. One of them had blood on it. DNA analysis proved it was Monica's, as well as a necklace found among Adam's possessions in his truck. The man had also discarded some gloves as he ran from Patricia's house. Further analysis revealed the gloves had DNA from both Adam and Monica. Forensic scientists found blood samples on it that turned out to be from Darlene and Patricia, the first two women he attacked. Legal proceedings against the highway killer then began. In December 2007, Adam was sentenced to 25 to 30 years after pleading guilty to the attempted murder of Shay. He pleaded guilty to 9 of the 10 charges he faced, which included breaking and entering, armed assault in a dwelling, assault with intent to murder, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. He only denied the charge of attempting to rape a minor. When the judge asked him if he had done all that the McDonough family accused him of, the burly, bearded man, his arms chained to his waist, simply said, "Almost everything." Shay, who was 16 at the time, did not appear in court on the day of the sentencing, but her parents did. Jeannie, her mother, told Adam that one day he would have to answer for his actions, not just in a court of law. Adam's next trial was in October 2008 in New Jersey, where he pleaded guilty to Monica's murder and was sentenced to 50 years. Finally, in June 2010 in Pennsylvania, Adam pleaded guilty to 2 other crimes to avoid the death penalty. He was then sentenced to between 10 and 20 years for the attempted murder of Patricia and received a life sentence for the murder of Darlene. Members of Darlene's family addressed the judge before the sentencing, expressing a mix of sadness and anger. Todd, Darlene's husband, said what happened was the result of a senseless and unnecessary act by a coward. Adam, wearing the orange and white prison uniform, had his hands shackled. He looked different from the man who had been arrested. He had lost a considerable amount of weight and had his hair and beard cut short. He showed no emotion when he received his sentence and declined his right to speak because he had nothing to say, as he pointed out during the trial. Meanwhile, Nick, Darlene's 25-year-old son at the time of the trial, asked the judge to review the investigation and sentence his mother's killer to death. He told reporters outside the courthouse that he wished to see him dead, but the prosecution had decided not to seek the death penalty as such executions are rare in Pennsylvania. Adam Leroy is serving his sentences at a maximum security prison with 2,000 beds. Authorities have speculated whether Adam was involved in other murders, given the extensive routes truckers take, but this has not been proven. Even the criminal himself has refused to comment to the police on this speculation. One such case occurred in the town where Adam lived and relates to the murder of a police officer who was shot 7 times in October 1996, and his body was found in his patrol car after he had pulled over a truck reported as stolen. Although the modus operandi in this case is substantially different from Adam's, a composite sketch of the suspect created with the help of witnesses resembles the highway killer. In 2011, Jeannie McDonough published a book recounting how a normal family ended the criminal crusade of a serial killer. It started as a personal diary with which the woman tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions she felt after saving her daughter from the monster Adam, and the guilt and sadness she experienced for the other victims of the man. She then began to learn more about the women who fell victim to the criminal. She attended several trials in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and started exchanging letters with relatives and friends of the victims. All of this is detailed in the book. Over time, Shay moved in with some friends and began working as a nanny, and her parents had to fight against the sense of overprotection towards their daughter. They also installed a powerful home security system. The case of Adam brings us back to motiveless killers. He was perhaps an aggressive man, but with no criminal record, who suddenly, at the age of 43, embarked on a 17-day murder spree, committing crimes against 4 women who had no connection to each other or to him. They simply lived in houses near a major road and had the misfortune of leaving their doors unlocked. The highways became the hunting ground for this man, who chose his victims randomly, only focusing on those who could not defend themselves or pose a threat to him. This concludes today's Unreal True Crime episode. Again, I remind you to subscribe and leave a like to let me know you appreciate my work. Good night, until next time. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. Ayla Reynolds was born on April 4, 2010 in Waterville, a city in the state of Maine, United States. She was a beautiful girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, and an irresistible smile. She loved music and dancing to the rhythm of her favorite songs. Her parents, Trista Reynolds and Justin DiPietro, were not a couple but had known each other for a long time. They had a brief romance in the summer of 2009, resulting in Trista getting pregnant. The news was particularly surprising for Justin, who had no intention of having a child with Trista and even doubted he was the father. When Trista gave birth to Ayla, the resemblance to Justin was undeniable, but he still refused to acknowledge her as his daughter. A paternity test in July 2010 finally made him accept his parenthood. Consequently, in December of the same year, he was ordered by Child Protective Services to provide child support. Trista and Justin didn't have a court-approved custody agreement. However, Trista, who lived in Portland, had the primary physical custody of Ayla thanks to an arrangement between them. It was only in mid-2011, after Ayla's first birthday, that Justin started having visits with her. He lived an hour and a half away, and the encounters were meant to be during the day and very brief. They agreed that he could occasionally take Ayla with him, but never overnight. In the months following Ayla's birth, Trista became pregnant again, this time by her fiancé Raymond. Thus, in 2011, Ayla became the elder sister to Raymond Jr., and Trista managed the care of both children. Everything changed on October 13, 2011, when Trista had an encounter with Child Protective Services. The details of the complaint that led to this meeting are not clear, but it was known that Trista had a substance abuse problem. That day, officials gave her an ultimatum: overcome her addiction or lose her children. Immediately, Trista entered a 10-day rehabilitation program and left her children in the care of her mother and sister. Ayla and Raymond were her world, and she was determined not to lose them. By October 2011, Justin had seen Ayla approximately 5 to 10 times. However, Just 4 days after Trista's internment on October 17th, Justin and his family decided they wanted custody of Ayla. Justin's mother, Phoebe DiPietro, contacted Child Protective Services and received approval to take Ayla. The official call to inform Trista's relatives about the agency's decision came swiftly. When Ayla's aunt heard that they had to hand over Ayla, she criticized the decision, claiming that Justin was abusive and had harmed the child in the past. The officials argued that a father has more rights to custody than an aunt. Once permission was granted, Justin and his family went to pick up Ayla, but they did not know the address. The child protection officials provided the location through the police. Officer Charles Weaver accompanied Justin and his mother to Jessica's house, Ayla's aunt. The paternal grandmother waited in the car while Justin and the police officer went to the door, leading to a dramatic scene. Jessica implored the officer not to take the child away and warned that she wouldn't give up Ayla willingly. The officer noted that Ayla was in good spirits. She was incessantly laughing, playing, and even trying to initiate conversation. To demonstrate her point, Jessica, Trista's sister, told the officer to observe how Ayla's behavior changed when Justin appeared. At that moment, he had just approached, and seeing him, Ayla immediately started to cry and tried to distance herself. Despite this, the officer took the child and handed her to her father. Ayla was struggling and screaming and even attempted to bite the officer when she was placed in Justin's arms. Ayla's aunt told Officer Charles that Ayla was terrified of her father and that they couldn't take the child away. Charles explained that if it were his decision, he wouldn't let Ayla go with Justin, but it wasn't up to him. He was there to enforce the directive from Child Services. It's crucial to clarify that if Justin had wanted primary physical custody of Ayla, he would have had to reach an agreement with the child's mother or otherwise undergo a judicial process to obtain a judge's approval. As we saw in the custody exchange we just recounted, there was neither an agreement nor a court involved. What was applied was the judgment of a Child Protective Services supervisor. What the official did not consider were the arrangements made by the mother herself, who had full custody for the child to remain in the care of her relatives during her temporary absence. On the other hand, before a court grants a parent exclusive physical custody of a child, usually the conditions are thoroughly evaluated, including a background check and a home visit, which did not occur in Ayla's case. In essence, in custody procedures, the child's best interest must prevail, but reportedly, no report was found to support the adopted decision. In analyses published about Ayla's case, it was believed that only the presence of imminent danger threatening the child's safety could outweigh the stability and continuity provided by staying with her maternal relatives. In this sense, it could be thought that Child Protective Services officials believed the child was at risk. If that had been the case, it is not justified that the measure was applied only to Ayla and not to her little brother Raymond. The father took the girl to his childhood home in Waterville, where he lived with his 47-year-old mother, Phoebe, his 24-year-old sister, Elisha, and her daughter, Gabriella, who, like Ayla, was a baby. At that time, Justin, 25, occupied the partially finished basement, a single large room, while the rest of the family lived upstairs. During the time spent in rehabilitation, Trista called Justin every day to speak with Ayla and ensure everything was all right. In these contexts, she perceived no warning signs. On October 20th, 2011, coinciding with the 8th day of Trista's treatment, there was a meeting to discuss Ayla's case attended by Child Protective Services members, 2 doctors, Trista and her sister Jessica, who were accompanied by a lawyer, and Justin, who participated by phone. This encounter resulted in an agreement. Ayla would be returned to her mother on October 22nd, 2011, as soon as Trista completed the addiction recovering program. It was also agreed that Justin would bring Ayla to the treatment center on the 21st for a visit. Everything was going well for Trista, but the situation would soon change. None of the established agreements were fulfilled. Desperate to regain her daughter, Trista repeatedly called Child Protective Services for help to enforce the agreement made in their presence. Since she could not get anywhere with Child Protective Services, she sought a temporary agreement with Justin. He would continue to keep the child, and she would have regular visits. On November 12, 2011, Justin took the girl to an emergency room. After conducting the pertinent studies, the doctors determined that the little girl had a broken bone in one of her joints. Specifically, the broken bone was in the joint that connects the elbow to the upper arm. Justin told the doctor that the accident had occurred the previous night on November 11th. According to his account, it was raining, and he slipped and fell on her while on the porch with Ayla in his arms. He added that, although she had cried, she didn't seem to be injured, and it wasn't evident until the next morning that she required urgent medical attention. By the following Monday, the orthopedist considered that surgery wouldn't be necessary and that the injury would likely heal on its own. A week later, on November 26th, during her third medical appointment to assess the child's progress, the specialist said things were going as planned. Trista was present at that medical consultation to closely follow her daughter's recovery, never thinking that this would be the last time she would hold her in her arms. From that moment, things spiraled. Tired of arguing over the custody of her daughter, over visitations, and even over her right to talk to the child on the phone, the mother decided to take a step forward. On December 15, 2011, she filed papers in court to initiate legal proceedings to obtain full physical custody of Ayla. Just 2 days later, on Saturday, December 17th, Justin called the police in the morning to report Ayla's disappearance from his mother's house, where he was staying with his girlfriend, Courtney Roberts, and his sister, Elisha. He assured them that they had put the 20-month-old girl to bed the night before, and when they woke up, she was gone. Early that morning, Trista had started a car trip to a coastal city in Maine, just 50 miles from the Canadian border, to visit her boyfriend Raymond, who had just entered a correctional facility after being convicted of arson. She was dozing in the passenger seat while her father-in-law, Robert Fortier, drove. Robert answered a call from Trista's father, informing him that Ayla was missing. The news left him frozen, and he looked for a suitable place to stop the vehicle and wake Trista. Still drowsy, she heard her father's voice and managed to understand that her baby's whereabouts were unknown. Desperate, Trista changed her course to meet the police who were searching for her little daughter. The journey lasted an hour and a half, but for Trista, it seemed like an eternity. Throughout the trip, she frantically called Justin to find out what had happened, terrified at the lack of response. Even upon arriving at the police station, both Trista and her fiancé's father gave statements. About 30 minutes later, Trista's father joined them at the police headquarters, angry and very distressed. As it transpired, Justin had called 911 that morning at 8:49 to report the disappearance. He said the last time someone saw Ayla was the previous night around 10 p.m., when his sister Elisha checked on her before going to bed. On Saturday morning, they discovered she had disappeared from her crib, but he didn't specify the time in the call. Justin's theory was that the minor had been kidnapped by an unknown intruder. The news of the minor's disappearance spread like wildfire, and the authorities wasted no time initiating an operation. Police chief spoke to the media, stating that the case was being aggressively investigated and that their goal was to find Ayla at all costs. The police proceeded to search the house for any clues that could lead them to the minor. To facilitate operations, the family stayed with friends. At the same time, a command center was established to coordinate the search operation. On the second day, Sunday, December 18th, search dogs were deployed, and the area around the house where Ayla was last seen was searched. Trista's home also underwent a meticulous search, during which the distressed woman had to stay with her mother and younger son in a motel. Trista's father found it exceedingly difficult to sit idle, as Ayla was the apple of his eye. On the third day, Monday, December 19th, the FBI was requested to assist in the search. By this time, 75 individuals from various agencies were involved in the operation. The Maine State Police seized 2 vehicles from the Di Pietro residence. One, a 1996 Ford Explorer, belonged to Justin. The other, a 4-door silver sedan, was owned by Justin's girlfriend, Courtney, who was also present on the night of the disappearance. From day one, local newspapers echoed the news the following morning. Headlines in print media were already covering the story, and 72 hours later, Trista could be seen in interviews with different local news outlets. She did not hesitate to point towards Justin. By the end of the first week, the Today Show, one of the most successful morning news programs in the United States, highlighted the news. There, Trista insisted that her daughter's father was the only one who could answer her questions, as he was the last to see her alive. On the evening of the 4th day, Justin made his first statement to the media. He appeared calm, as if the disappearance hadn't occurred while the child was under his care. He claimed to have no idea what happened to Ayla and stated he wouldn't make accusations or insinuations until the police determined who was responsible for the disappearance. He also announced that he and his family would do everything possible to aid the investigation and secure his daughter's return. During his statement, Justin acknowledged that Ayla was under his exclusive custody at the time of her disappearance, but he lied, stating that this was achieved through an agreement with the mother. Moreover, he added that Trista was incapable of taking care of the child. As days passed, the search efforts widened. The FBI's child abduction rapid deployment team canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on every door. They repeatedly interviewed neighbors, hoping to uncover some revealing details. The police emphasized the significant effort underway, seeing only commitment and energy from the 75 officers dedicated to resolving the case. Until the 10th day after Justin's complaint, it was estimated that 5,000 hours of work had been invested in the search, and 330 leads were being followed. The operation also involved around 50 civilian volunteers from the Search and Rescue Association. A reward of $30,000 was offered to anyone who could provide a lead that would help in recovering Ayla. Trista remained steadfast in her efforts to find her beloved daughter. The grieving mother was determined in her fight to keep everyone focused on the case. She worked with allies and support groups to organize vigils, marches, and events in memory of Ayla. News cameras were always present, and she, along with other spokespeople, offered new topics to journalists to keep the story on the front page and in the nation's mind. Gradually, the initially optimistic and hopeful message from the authorities started changing. The chief of police continued to insist that the investigation was being considered a missing person case and not a homicide. However, the mood definitively shifted when Justin's house and the surrounding area were cordoned off. The cars were confiscated, and the head of the Maine criminal prosecution made a public appearance. The police publicly ruled out the possibility of Ayla having walked away on her own, and on the 13th day, the police chief handed over the reins of the case to the State Police Serious Crime Unit. At that moment, an announcement nobody wanted to hear was made. The case ceased being the search for a missing girl and started being considered a criminal investigation. During the initial days, Justin tried to stay as far away from the media as possible, but gradually his presence began to become more frequent. In one of his appearances on the Today Show, he spoke about the change in the message from the law enforcement agencies, insisted that someone had kidnapped Ayla, and expressed his wish for whoever took her to return her home. He also asserted that he had come on the program hoping to reach whoever had his daughter to let them know that what they were doing was wrong. As if he knew the person in question, he spoke directly to them, saying they might think what they were doing was right for Ayla, but it wasn't. He clarified that this person had no right because they weren't her father, and that the child needed to be at home with her family. When questioned about the silence he had maintained until that point, Justin acknowledged that his efforts to cooperate had been delayed. He justified himself by stating that he had been a bit naive during the first weeks, thinking that Ayla would return. He also claimed that the law enforcement agencies had advised him to stay away from the press. This was partially confirmed by the spokesperson for the Maine Department of Public Safety, who explained that this was only said to him at the beginning. Later, the police themselves encouraged Ayla's parents to remain in the public eye. Justin took the opportunity to respond directly to the insinuations that had been made about him. He asked the television host to come see him and spend a day with him to witness what he was going through. Finally, he said that he praised the police's efforts, although some of the techniques and tactics they had to use had not been enjoyable. He pointed out that the truth is the truth. No matter how many times you are asked the same question and shouted at that you are a liar, anticipating that the truth is patient and would come to light. By the end of January, the police revealed that Ayla's blood had been found in various places in the DiPietro house. It also emerged that, while there was not enough evidence to make any arrests, Justin, Courtney, and Elisha, the three adults living in the residence where the girl was last seen, were considered suspects. Stephen McCausland, the spokesperson for the Maine Department of Public Safety, said that the family's version of events was not supported by any forensic evidence, thereby ruling out the possibility that someone could have entered the bedroom where Ayla slept alone and taken her without any of the three adults in the house noticing. 6 months after Ayla's disappearance was reported, on May 30th, 2012, the police said that it was unlikely that the little girl was alive. Trista's family allowed journalists into their home as they watched the press conference where this news was announced. Trista immediately broke into tears. Then her sorrow turned to rage, and she asserted that Justin had killed her baby. For Trista's family, learning in detail the results of some forensic tests conducted at Justin's family's house was very hard. They knew Ayla's blood was found and had even been told that the amount found was equivalent to 25% of the blood volume of her body. However, they had never been in front of the evidence until January 2013, when everything discovered was revealed to them. To begin with, Justin's 1996 Ford Explorer had a baby seat in the back, and Ayla's blood was found on the left shoulder strap. There was also dried gastric fluid on the back seats. In the girl's bedroom, blood was found on some of her princess, pink sneakers on the floor next to her crib, as well as on the face and arms of her doll. The investigators thought that she might have tried to clean the blood from her mouth with her toy. Additionally, a blood stain was located on the living room sofa. However, most of the blood traces were in the basement. A pool of Ayla's blood stained the center of the mattress on which Justin slept with Courtney. Moreover, vomit and an unidentified pink fiber resembling hair that could be from a toy were found on the bed. Next to the same piece of furniture were Justin's sneakers stained with Ayla's blood on the tongue and inside. Additionally, there were splashes on the cement floor around the bed and on the walls. The latter matched Ayla's height. An expert determined that some drops were the size of a dime, indicative of trauma from a blunt object. Additionally, the experts determined that some blood spatter patterns in the house might have been expelled by Ayla through coughing, indicating that her injuries were both internal and external. The police stated that bed linens had been used to clean the girl's blood. It was horrific for Trista and her family to learn these details, and they hadn't seen everything yet. The same officers exposing the gruesome evidence warned them that they were about to witness something even more horrifying. Luminol tests were conducted in the house, revealing blood traces invisible to the naked eye. The slides taken at the house devastated Trista. After seeing them, she left the police station in a panic. She was more convinced than ever that her daughter, Ayla, had been murdered. The police said there were more images to show her, but she refused to see them. She'd had enough. Reportedly, when the police showed Justin and the DiPietro family the same photographic evidence months before, he showed no reaction. The police also tried to show the photos to the family with whom the DiPietro stayed during their exile from their house while it was being processed by crime scene investigators. They refused. They were not interested. Justin's girlfriend, Courtney, who was with Justin on the night of the disappearance, had the same reaction. After confronting the compelling police findings, Trista told the press amid her unbearable pain and helplessness that Justin, Elisha, and Courtney were still walking the streets as if nothing had happened. 8 months after receiving the dramatic report in September 2013, Trista wrote an explosive letter to the press about the evidence and the photos she had been shown. She was tired of waiting and, with or without law enforcement's blessing, she wanted to rekindle public interest in the case. In spring 2016, a team of journalists went to Justin's mother's house. Elisha, Ayla's aunt, answered the door, and the journalist asked about the blood evidence. She explained that Ayla was lactose intolerant and had been vomiting. However, a quick internet search showed that common symptoms of lactose intolerance are gas, bloating, abdominal pain, and diarrhea. While nausea and vomiting are listed, they are not the most common symptoms, let alone vomiting blood. In 2017, at Trista's request, a judge finally declared Ayla legally dead. The magistrate ruled that the death occurred around December 17, 2011, when she was reported missing by her father, Justin. With that resolution in hand, Trista and her lawyers filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Justin, alleging he caused Ayla's death through intentional unlawful acts and subjected the girl to pain prior to death, fear, terror, and physical injuries. At the time the lawsuit was filed, the subject was missing, and it was later learned that he and his lawyers denied any wrongdoing and labeled the lawsuit baseless. Faced with this, Trista decided to hold a press conference in which she addressed her dead daughter's father directly, asking him if he had any conscience.
I can see it in your eyes. And you know that's the problem. You look at me and you're gonna... I know you care.
Just say something, man.
Please, Justin.
Earlier this year, 2023, a judge approved Trista's petition to include Phoebe and Elisha in the wrongful death lawsuit. The 3 defendants are facing civil charges for wrongful death, conscious pain and suffering, and unlawful interference with the body of a deceased person. Additionally, Justin faces a charge for breaching a parent's duty to care for a minor child. Both Trista and her lawyer knew that they would not receive any financial compensation from Justin. That wasn't the goal of the lawsuit. Their objective was to reveal information and uncover the truth. There were so many strange things about Ayla's disappearance. For example, investigators told Trista something astonishing about the morning Ayla disappeared. Before calling 911, Justin drove to Portland and back. He claimed he thought Trista had taken Ayla and was looking for her, but he never called her or any of her family members. However, during that long trip, he did call his friend, who had sold him a $25,000 life insurance policy for Ayla a few weeks before. The weird thing is that Justin stayed at this friend's house while detectives advanced the investigations after the disappearance. This action was astonishing, considering that Justin stayed out of his baby's life during the 9 months of pregnancy and most of the child's existence. Trista also revealed having received strange messages from Justin in the week following the day he took Ayla. He mentioned being afraid that someone would try to kidnap her or snatch her away. The last time he said something similar was around December 11th, 6 days before the disappearance was reported. But when the child disappeared, those same messages became threatening and confusing. Trista said she had always wondered what those words meant. And well, that concludes today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, give a like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. See you soon. This is Unreal True Crime.